I started painting 2 years ago, and that all because of one game of Dungeons and Dragons. I did not only like the game, no, I also loved the paint job that my friends did. Without any goal in mind, I started to paint with my friends, and I want to share 5 things with you that I have learned along the way. And so the first thing I learned was to not overthink and just paint. And even though this doesn't necessarily apply to me, I did have some people around me that I introduced to the hobby that actually had difficulties with this. I had quite a good start in the hobby. I just naturally started to paint, and I just felt really good doing it. But then I got some other people into the hobby, and I really noticed that they were overthinking what colors to use, with what parts of the mini they had to start, which really blocked their creativity and just their natural flow. And actually the insight I got from this is not that I'm like super good or something, because I have my flaws and my strengths, but I really started to notice at that point that it was actually a strength for me that I could intuitively paint a mini, and I was really happy with that. But also for everybody else, you cannot speculate over the perfect mini with limited information that you have. So just start and have a good time. So the second thing I've learned is how to use my brushes properly. I was actually in the assumption that once I have my first set of brushes that I wouldn't have to buy any new ones in the near future. Well, I was wrong about that, because my brushes didn't really have a tip for a long time. They started splitting rather fast. So I was just really annoyed, and I was really struggling with not knowing how to use my brush, how to load my brush, clean my brush. And overall, it was just really annoying. So I decided to watch some YouTube videos on how to use your brush properly. I even decided to buy some brushes with the same size, that if I would manage to murder one of my brushes once again, I could just pick a new one and start over again. But the funny thing was, once I actually watched those videos, did know how to clean my brushes, did buy some extra brushes, I actually got better at handling my brushes, that I didn't really have to end up with dry brushes no more. So that was good. I like that. So we got a sharp tip, I was less frustrated, and I was having fun again. So the third thing I learned is to not cut corners on tools, and I learned this the hard way because I'm quite a stubborn person, and I thought to myself I could just hold my miniature while painting, but then I would forget where I would place my fingers, and at the end I would look at my miniature and I'm like, oh, I scratched some spots off, so I had to do that again. And it wasn't one spot that I scratched off, it was most of the time multiple spots. Next to that, I also refused to buy a wet palette, because I just used a porcelain plate and my paint would dry up super quickly, to the point that it was actually quite expensive, because some of my paints are actually already empty right now, and they're not supposed to be empty only after 2 years. Obviously it depends on how much you paint, but that's not how much I paint. I simply didn't want to spend the money. I thought I could make it work, and I would only throw away paint. I actually even spent the summer outside painting. Can you imagine how fast that paint would dry on a porcelain plate without water underneath? Yeah, I think you get it. So in this case, I actually think it's best not to try and be cost efficient. I do understand that if you're new to the hobby, you want to give yourself some time instead of buying everything at first, only to discover that you actually don't like the hobby. But in my case, it took me 1 year to actually buy a wet palette and a handle. So don't be like me. But in the end, I got a handle. I did get a wet palette, and it actually changed my workflow dramatically. Obviously, holding the handle is just much more comfortable, and the wet palette is also a great tool because it allows you to control your paint much better with glazing, wet blending, diluting your paint. It is definitely something I recommend. So once again, do not cut corners on your tools. Alright, so I got to a point where I understood how to use my brushes. I understood that I needed tools. And then the fourth thing I had learned was going out of my comfort zone and trying new things like techniques. And the first techniques I was trying to learn was actually layering and wet blending. I think I had the most difficulty with that. Layering was something I had already tried, but really trying to blend in colors, that was next level. I got to a point where I got impatient with myself, as I was really struggling with getting these nice blends. I watched many videos on YouTube, but I just thought I was crazy. I thought I was missing a detail. I thought I was doing something wrong. You see everybody making these nice blends. I just didn't understand what was going wrong. Eventually, after watching like multiple videos, I just told myself if I watch enough videos, it would eventually stick. But it was not only from watching videos on YouTube, it was actually from a Patreon subscription on some Dito that I understood, and this is actually very simple, I understood that I had to wait a little longer. Because if you want to blend in colors, and I'm not talking about wet blending, I'm talking specifically about glazing, you have to wait. Yes, I didn't know that. And I also didn't know that it takes multiple layers of glaze to get that nice blend. Yep, because the thing is, if you actually go over the layer too quickly, you take off the previous layer of paint. And that is something that I didn't know. But once I knew that, my blends just skyrocketed. I really noticed that with the miniature I painted for my mom, because that was the first miniature where I really went all in on trying to make the best blends possible and gave myself enough patience. I even used a hairdryer to speed up the process. But yeah, that was something that actually did skyrocket my paint experience in the entire journey. And after I got control on some of these techniques, I got to a point where I asked myself the question, why? Why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And this is the point where I learned to close the knowledge gap on hue, saturation, value, and contrast. Because I had been painting for like 1.5 years now, I had been trying many different things, but I didn't know why. And I noticed this not from a perspective of having a conflict with myself, it was rather me being curious, why am I painting the way I'm painting? And how can I improve this, not only from techniques, but understanding maybe a philosophy behind it, maybe certain harmonies, like color harmonies. By knowing that, like closing that gap from understanding, like just randomly doing something and doing something with a philosophy or with some sort of principle behind it, that made a huge difference. Yes, you can paint a miniature without knowing all of that and just layer yourself up, create some shadows, midtones, and highlights. But once I knew why I had to do that and create a three-dimensional object, like really make it shine, that's when it started to make a difference for me. And that was also the point where I really started to notice, hey, painting is so much more than just putting paint on a three-dimensional object. No, it was really about making something live. Really, I've noticed if you don't create the contrast, if it's not value or saturation, it will be flat. And whenever it's flat, you will not see the entire mini. You will not see what the mini stands for, and you will miss context. And that actually did make a huge difference for me, if not the most difference. So these were my 5 things that I have learned in the last 2 years of painting minis. These are by no means rules that you have to follow. I'm just simply sharing my adventure and journey on YouTube for you to be entertained. And if you were amused by this content, then definitely don't forget to subscribe. I spend a lot of time creating these videos, so you would definitely help me out. I will keep on learning, sharing my videos online, and keep experimenting new things because I also want to improve my painting. That is also what Fatalquest is standing for. This channel is my quest, creating an awesome place for me to share all my creativity for you guys to enjoy. And if you want to see what I've been doing in those 2 years and how I have been painting, I recently made a video on painting a boost for my mom, so definitely check that video out because there you see my latest techniques. See you guys in the next video.